Hi, I'm Scott Simi. I am the editor-in-chief of DroneDJ.com, and I'm joined today by Ishvina Singh, senior editor, and Bruce Crumley, also a senior editor with the website. Ishvina is in India, and last week I said that Bruce was in Paris, but actually, Bruce, you're not in Paris. Can you tell us where you are? Because actually, I'm quite curious.
I'm in Biarritz, which is in the Basque Country. It's about, I would say, about 40 kilometers from the Spanish border.
Nice.
Which is also Basque Country. It's divided in two, but.
Excellent. So we've got a few topics we wanted to hop on to today. And one of them is just that there have been a couple of incidents lately around drone safety, or, drones not being used in a very safe way. One of these instances we reported about came from Helsinki, where the Traficom, the sort of authority for air traffic control and those sorts of matters in Finland, noted that there was a near collision with a drone, unidentified drone, and an unidentified aircraft back in March. But essentially, the drone was at something like 400 meters and was literally right off the wing of the aircraft. So obviously, we don't like seeing this kind of news, and thankfully it doesn't happen that often. Ishvina, what were your thoughts when you saw this this latest incident?
I mean, I was just reminded of all the old incidents. There have been many of them. And I remember in 2018, there was an incident in Florida, Hollywood Beach, when there was a helicopter that just kind of, came on very fast to a recreational drone user. And just last year, there was this Air Force One drone sighting. And I don't think that we ever heard back from FAA about what happened to that incident. And of course, the most famous infamous actually, the Gatwick drone incident, again, in which, we haven't been able to establish if there was a drone involved or not.
And I think, Bruce, you also wrote about another incident recently where there was, a safety concern. Maybe you could let us in on what that was about.
Yeah, there were a couple of incidents that were ruled upon by the British panel that reviews these kind of near-miss situations, and their verdicts can go out from sort of a Class A incident, which is very high likelihood of a collision, down to I think it's C. And both of the incidents were classified as A. One was a air ambulance was trying to land on a London hospital roof and was buzzed by a drone. The drone actually circled around and was right underneath the helicopter, and the pilot didn't even see it. There was also an incident that we did not write about, at least not yet, that just happened. I believe it was yesterday, of a Scottish air ambulance being buzzed at an altitude of 1,000 feet, which is way beyond what is permitted by law. So, I mean, obviously these things, it may be well that, when you see these things come in a kind of series, they always look like it's going on everywhere, and it's really a growing problem. But in any case, these people are clearly breaking the rules, and people have to be a lot more cognizant of the dangers they're putting people in when they're flying in restricted zones.
Yes, and it's not just. Sorry, I just got distracted because something pinged up on my screen that I need to close before that happens again. But there was another incident out in British Columbia that we wrote about. Now, BC is a province in Canada, Western Canada, and like parts of the Western US has been hit with like extreme temperatures. And there are a ton of wildfires burning. And of course, we see these warnings in the US and in Canada all the time. If you fly, we can't, because the last thing you want to be doing is operating a helicopter or water bomber and moving into one of these areas where it's already it's difficult flying conditions for crewed aircraft. You've got smoke, you've got other turbulence and heat and things to deal with, and you're highly focused on the job. So truly, the last thing you want to do is see a drone out of your windshield. But in fact, there were two incidents over 2 days, and in one of them, they had to halt aircraft operations. And the interesting thing that I was not aware of is that the fine in Canada, if you do disrupt air operations over firefighting activities, is up to $100,000 Canadian and 1 year in jail. So the penalties for these kinds of actions can be really, really quite severe. Yet we still see them from time to time. Again, thankfully, not that frequently. We still see them happening. So what do you think is the issue, Ishvina? Do you think it's just that people aren't aware of the rules? Do you think it's some people who are aware but just don't care and think they won't get caught? Or maybe a combination of both?
It's definitely a combination of both, because you may remember in May there were two back-to-back incidents in California's Bolsa Chica Ecological Reserve, where two drone crashes happened at a nesting site of a seabird called Elegant Tern. So 1,500 eggs were abandoned when the mama and papa birds flew away because they were threatened first by the drone crash, and then people who went down to search for those aircraft. And one of the drone operators, the responsible one, came forward and he was cited by the authorities, but the other could not be located. And now there's like a $5,000 reward for anyone who provides information on them.
I guess
we definitely need to be more responsible.
I guess one of the things too is that we're seeing a proliferation, or certainly a lot of growth, in the use of drone detection and mitigation technology. Some of these companies have deployed to many parts around the world to sort of guard secure facilities and stadiums, nuclear power plants, that sort of thing. So I think, perhaps some of these pilots may not be aware that not only can their drone be detected with existing technology in airspace, but generally these detection systems can also locate where the operator is, even if the operator is several kilometers away from the site. Do you think the growth of the use of these drone detection systems, and actually we saw last year these used successfully at a couple of MLB games where a drone came in and disrupted play, do you think that the increasing use of these sorts of technologies is going to basically help prevent, or do you think it's just going to take charging a couple of people with really high profile incidents? Ishvina?
It will have to be a bit of both, actually, because there's a reason that FAA wants remote ID to be enforced come 2023. But there's a reason that they want, if a drone appears to be flying recklessly, and the law enforcement agency should be able to figure out its control station or takeoff location. It has been a contentious issue, but I do believe that it will make the sky safer for all. More use of these kind of technologies. Bruce,
your thoughts?
Well, getting back to the two issues. The first of all, I have a feeling there's probably a bit of somewhat reckless daring do going on. Pilots who are really good drone pilots and who figure, hey, I want to try to test my skills and maybe fly it in a restricted area without really thinking or trying to get in situations that turn dangerous, such as the London air ambulance. I mean, clearly the pilot of that craft knew what he or she was doing. The Scottish case, and just to let trucker Vito Bailey know, I must have explained it poorly. The Scottish helicopter was at an altitude of 1,000, was cruising back home. It wasn't trying to land, and that again may have been a case of somebody just saying, I can take it up higher. We're out in the middle of nowhere. We're out in the middle of Fife. What are we gonna, what's gonna happen? And what happened was just it happened to have a helicopter passing at that level at the same time. So there's probably that involved, and probably a mix of kind of too much daring and a little bit of insouciance mixed in. So it's probably all that, not all that grave. What is, however, are the kinds of applications kind of used for drones that all these anti-drone technologies are coming out with. And we just did a story, I believe it was earlier this week, about France testing one of its major laser drones, whackers, for anticipation for using it at the 2024 Paris Olympics, and that clearly is something else. This is not being developed, primarily or even maybe as a secondary use to zap, sort of casual user drones. These things are out for zapping some drones that are up to no good and being used in attack. But interestingly enough, it seems to me, and this is just anecdotal, but it seems to me that the anti-drone tech companies are ones you're hearing about, perhaps even more than drone companies themselves. It seems to be a portion of the market that's really, really taking off.
We have a comment here from Gary Boisseau, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Gary. Gary says, I fly daily in the footprint of one of the largest and busiest airports in the world, and I have no issues with the FAA, only with hapless civilians. One of the things that is coming, of course, in the United States, and I suspect we'll see similar regulations elsewhere, is the rule on remote ID. And essentially what this means is that you must comply. I believe the date is 2023, so it's a couple of years off. But your drone must either, from the factory, come with an internal built-in module that can broadcast wirelessly information about the registration of the drone. And manufacturers, I believe by September of 2022, and again, I could be off by a month or two in these dates, but manufacturers will have to build this into commercial drones. So even if you've got what will then be a legacy drone, you'll be able to purchase an external module. And sorry to ramble on about this, but there will be two options here. One is that generally available apps will allow you to identify a drone that you see nearby. It'll by the registration. It won't contain any personal information, just a registration number. However, people from the FAA or law enforcement will have access to better apps, or at least apps that can provide them with more information, and they'll actually be able to identify the pilot. So, Ishvina, do you think when remote ID comes in, that will be yet another reason why hopefully we will see a reduction in these already low number of incidents?
Most certainly, and I have to mention, I mean, DJI is already actively working in this field so much, because the device that you mentioned that tell your location to the other aircraft, the ADSB receivers, they have been releasing that in all aircraft since January 1, 2020, since last year. Any aircraft that weighs more than 250 grams. And there has been very active development towards the geofencing software as well, which in theory should not allow people to fly where they're not supposed to, but then there are overrides for that. So maybe a little more strict action on that front as well. It should help.
It's interesting that you raise DJI, because we've written before kind of a kudos to DJI piece discussing its use of AirSense. And AirSense, if you're not familiar with it, is, as Ishvina was mentioning, built into these products now. And it is capable of detecting an ADSB signal from a helicopter or a small aircraft that might be flying nearby. ADSB stands for Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast. And it basically just pings out, this is what the aircraft is, this is where it is. And the really cool thing that we've seen since DJI began releasing this product, and we saw a lot of videos about this popping up after the DJI FPV product was released earlier this year, is that there were people flying, and all of a sudden, ping, this alert would pop up. And of course, these people are flying with goggles on, and they're not always obeying the rules to have a visual observer with them. So it's a tremendous tool to alert them when there's a low-flying aircraft. And just as an aside, I was piloting an Air 2S for a review when a small Cessna flying below 400 feet came into the airspace where I was flying. It was not apparently equipped with ADSB, or it may have been that I had the beta firmware, but I did not get a notification. But certainly I've seen a lot of videos where people have received these notifications. So I think it's really a tremendous feature that I would hope maybe other manufacturers might pick up on. Bruce, Do you think that this is, something that maybe should be an industry-wide feature as we see more and more drones in the air, and especially as we head into this new phase of urban air mobility or advanced air mobility, where we're going to start seeing aircraft and drones that might carry people or large deliveries over urban centers?
Yeah, it seems to me that there are already enough drones in the air right now being flown that to cause concerns about whether they're merited or not, but to at least cause concerns about possible collisions. And it's clear that once there was a proliferation that's on the way, that was undoubtedly on the way, and it's going to explode when, from delivery drones to, medium haul people transportation, air taxis, the whole deal. There are just going to be a lot more drones in the sky, and so therefore you're definitely going to need a lot more technology, a lot more communications between the craft and between people on the ground who want to can direct traffic as best they can, whether it's automated or not. As far as the identification systems go, clearly anybody who has evil intentions in mind with a drone is not going to bother using that for obvious reasons. I mean, they don't want to be detected, so why would they? So in a way, it's kind of it's good because it'll sort any concerns with the drones that people want to see in action, and that just leaves authorities really to concentrate on the ones that constitute a danger.
One of the comments we're seeing here from Tommy is what's going to happen when drones connect to wireless providers. And I'm assuming, Tommy, that you're talking about the increased range that you might be able to get if you're connected to a 4G network. In fact, we just saw that Parrot has just released an enterprise drone that does run on 4G. And I think, it's a good question, but I think the reality is already that with like a DJI product running on OcuSync 3, you've got a 10-kilometer range. You're limited really only by the battery. So already you'd be able to fly probably to the limits of the battery before the automatic return to home is going to kick in. But of course, there are other drones that might be fixed wing VTOLs that could have a much longer range connected to 4G. Will that create a more difficult problem? Possibly. Don't really know yet, but I think already with the existing sort of 10-kilometer range, people have the opportunity to get into places where, they could get into trouble. And I guess, that's one of the reasons, and really a key reason, why we have these visual line of sight rules. It's because the operator needs to be aware of the airspace. And the moment a drone is out of your sight and you can't see it anymore, then you don't know what's happening relative in the relative airspace. You won't be able to see if it's going to potentially be, heading toward a crewed aircraft. So I think that's one of the things there. Would you tend to agree, Ashvina, that that's kind of, sort of the issue here with visual line of sight and VV loss?
Yes, I think at some level pilots need to be more aware of the impact of their reckless behavior, because we know that impact with birds can damage airplanes. And the official data I have the official data on this, that that wildlife strikes have killed more than 290 people and destroyed over 270 aircraft between 1988 and 2019 globally.
Wow.
So, and there's a reason why Pentagon spends around 50 million every year to manage bird life around US airfields. And in 2015, the FAA commissioned a report, a study to test the potential damage that a crewed aircraft would undergo if there was a mid-air collision with a drone. And that report concluded that drones which collide with crewed aircraft can cause more structural damage. And that's because, unlike birds which have soft mass and tissue, most drones are made of rigid materials. So at some level, I think that drone pilots do not realize the gravity of the risk that they are putting to both, humans and property.
One of the things is that the manufacturers, and a couple of them in particular, really like to downplay the risks that might occur should a drone collide with an aircraft. I recall that there was some testing done at one of the universities in the United States where they fired a Phantom at the leading edge of a wing. I can't remember the aircraft. But they flew the Phantom, they fired this Phantom out of a cannon at a pretty good speed, but it literally tore apart the leading edge of the wing. And the response from one of the manufacturers was really to criticize the test and to say that, well, they fired that too fast out of the cannon. Really, there shouldn't be any issues here. Well, hang on a sec, manufacturer, because I can think off the top of my head of two incidents. One involving a Black Hawk helicopter that collided with, I believe it was a DJI product, and there was actually damage to the helicopter blade. I mean, they brought the helicopter down after this incident, and there was actual damage that was photographed and documented to the blade. And that's a Black Hawk helicopter, which is going to be built to incredible specifications. The other one that comes to mind was in Los Angeles last year. And there was a guy who flies like a Mavic Pro, and the police helicopter was up in their neighborhood because there was a robbery attempt at a pharmacy. For some reason, I remember it was at a pharmacy. So he decided, hey, I'm going to pop up and take a look. Well, he popped up to take a look, and he collided with the LAPD helicopter, was subsequently charged by the FAA, and apparently there was some damage to the helicopter as well. So I guess the message here is really, this is not something to mess around with, and not something that manufacturers, in my mind at least, should downplay. Ishvina, I'm sure you've seen some of these, responses from manufacturers saying drones are the safest things ever. They're safer than aircraft, which is actually true if you look at the statistics of all the flights that take place. But do you think it serves the industry when a manufacturer kind of says, oh, well, that test was not done right, and we don't believe essentially that this could cause that kind of damage?
One of the biggest beefs that I would have is that manufacturers other than DJI kind of, play that thing that they do not have geofencing built in, which means that your drone is more capable of flying anywhere you want. You wouldn't be, held at task as much as you would if you were flying a DJI drone. And that just kind of shows the attitude that manufacturers have toward the safety.
Bruce, do you have some thoughts on this? I know you're sort of newer to the drone space, but that certainly has been kind of the way things have played out in the past. When there are tests and incidents, often, the manufacturer's response tends to be, well, we certainly promote safe drone use, but we argue with how this experiment was conducted, and we don't believe that our products could cause this kind of damage.
Well, to play devil's advocate a little bit, I could understand a manufacturer's perspective. I'm not saying I validate it, but I understand a manufacturer's perspective of saying, well, wait a minute, you just made sure this collision, this crash, was not only possible, but it was inevitable. I mean, you arranged this whole thing so that you'd fire my drone into a plane and see what happens. What you have to take into account is how many planes are in the sky, how many drones are in the sky, and how many not just close misses, but collisions take place. And I have a feeling that's what they're saying is in a little bit of the same logic that some people think that the mainstream media goes over the top on terrorism reporting. And that is, well, of course, when it happens, it's a terrible, terrible thing, but in viewing it as, in close, zoomed up, situation perspective, you kind of mask the fact that it's a rarity. It hardly ever happens, as a matter of fact. And in fact, it's the exception to the rule. And I'm guessing, again, I'm not saying that that's an innocent or a completely unassailable perspective, but I could see manufacturers of drones saying, well, right, we all have to, do what we can, whether it's built-in tech or just, reminding people to fly responsibly. We have to do what we can to make sure the risk of accidents is as low as it possibly can. But hey, let's be real; they don't happen in the first place very often anyway.
I mean, certainly, I do have to give kudos to DJI, as I mentioned earlier, for the AirSense feature. I mean, it's brilliant. It was not required by law. Regulators were not demanding that drone manufacturers put this into their software and hardware capabilities. But we've seen so many instances now where people were alerted and they brought their drone down. And just to go back to the one case that I mentioned where I was flying the Air 2S, it's the first time that's ever happened to me, that a low flying aircraft suddenly came along, and literally, they appear out of nowhere. I mean, 1 second you're just flying your drone, and the next it's like, holy crap, there is an aircraft that is coming toward where I'm flying. And literally, I suspect this Cessna was probably at about 300 feet, and I was probably flying at 200 feet. So, of course, the moment I saw the aircraft, and I heard it first, and I just brought the drone down. But it's kind of like, well, if I had been up at the same altitude, I would have been exceedingly close to the flight path of the Cessna. So we're going to wrap it up here fairly shortly, but I think there's one other thing that's worth mentioning is just that we've made the decision at DroneDJ to adopt kind of gender neutral language. Bruce, you were the first to write about this. Was based on recommendations from the Drone Advisory Committee, which I believe is largely kind of representing the manufacturers and that side of the industry. But it made a series of recommendations to the FAA about the importance of gender neutral language. What can you tell us about that, about what you recall about that report, Bruce?
Well, I think they're all just very, in today's more attentive society, a lot more mindful of the words we use and why we use them, and maybe about the history that needs to be kind of updated. Unmanned, why unmanned? I mean, this is not there's very easily uncrewed. Uncrewed is far. It's just as useful. And the only reason you wouldn't change it is if you say, you'd be obstinate and say, well, I've been using this for decades and I'm not going to change now. That's just stupid, And well, no, it's not stupid, because then why don't we? If you feel that way, then let's go whole hog and change to unwomaned, and that way you won't have a problem with that either. So it's I just think it was very common sense and probably overdue the way a lot of changes and modifications are, and I'm glad it's DroneDJ has also decided to make that official. I think a lot of us were already using uncrewed already and trying to use gender neutral terms anyway. But I think it's a very good thing to have made it an official policy.
Ishvina, your thoughts on this?
Definitely, it was a change that was long time coming. I mean, gender neutral language is only going to make the industry more inclusive. We want more women in drones, definitely.
Well, we're pleased to have kind of just jumped ahead and decided to do it. We were already kind of doing it on an ad hoc basis, and we thought, let's just make this an official style policy. And there's actually some data out there. I can't cite it off the top of my head, but I know I've read it, where language like that can actually be a barrier to entry for a female who would like to enter a field that is already male dominated. It's just sort of one more layer of things when that language is there that might turn you off and you think, oh man, this is just a guy's club. So we're pleased to be doing this, and we're not doing it to be politically correct, as we stated in our post yesterday. We're doing it because it's right and because it's long overdue. Just before we wrap it up, one more comment came in from Gary talking about that's why I use Flight Radar app. So we're talking back about the ADSB and detection and awareness of aircraft in airspace. So the Flight Radar app, according to Gary, shows everything in the sky except for military aircraft. So that might be an app worth checking out. And trucker Beetle Bailey, a friend of DroneDJ's, is suggesting unhuman aircraft. But then I suppose that leaves open the possibility there could be aliens on board or something. So I think we're just going to go with uncrewed and crewed, and there are a couple of other changes as well. So that's a wrap for today. Listen, I thank the folks who tuned in and had some questions for us. We're going to be trying to do this once a week. So, mark Wednesday on your calendars at around 10 or 10:15, depending on if we have our act together or not, or encounter any technical issues. So thank you so much, Ishvina Singh, Senior Editor, Bruce Crumley, Senior Editor. I'm Scott Simi, Editor-in-Chief, and I'll let you guys say goodbye, and then we'll wrap it up.
See you
Thank
next
you.
week.
It's been a pleasure.
All right. Thanks very much, everyone, and keep watching. Oh, Unoccupied. Thanks, our trucker friend. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for the panel today. Keep checking out DroneDJ. We, continue to try to break stories and add context, and also, in the case of discussions like this, try to get into some of the meat and potato issues that we think are important to airspace safety and help to share knowledge that we think would benefit pilots. So thank you all very much. We'll see you next time.